I've always been into hiking. There's something about being out in nature that makes me feel at peace. But after what happened last fall near Red River Gorge in Kentucky, I don't think I'll ever go hiking at night again. It was late October, just a few days before Halloween. My friend Josh and I decided to do a late afternoon hike at Auxier Ridge, one of the lesser traveled trails in the area. The place wasn't as well known as the main routes like Sky Bridge or Gray's Arch, which was part of the appeal. No crowds, just miles of untouched forest and quiet trails. The plan was to hike to the overlook, take some pictures, and head back before dark. But, of course, we lost track of time. By the time we started heading back, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows through the trees. The temperature had dropped, and the wind had picked up, making the trees creak and sway around us. It should have been peaceful, but something about the atmosphere felt off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I realized everything was too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our boots crunching on the dirt. Josh noticed it too and joked, "Feels like we're being watched." I laughed it off, but something about the way he said it put me on edge. A few minutes later, I thought I heard footsteps behind us. Not the normal echo of our own steps, but something deliberate, soft, measured, like someone trying to stay hidden. I stopped and turned around, shining my flashlight down the trail. Nothing, just trees and shadows. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Josh hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I thought it was just my imagination." We picked up the pace. The parking lot was still about a mile away, and the deeper the night got, the more unnerved I felt. Every so often, I'd hear the footsteps again, always just far enough behind us that I couldn't be sure if they were real. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, maybe a small animal, or the wind shifting the leaves. But then we heard it. A low whistle coming from the trees off the trail. It was slow, deliberate, almost like someone trying to get our attention. Josh stopped dead in his tracks. "Tell me you heard that." I nodded. My mouth was dry. The sound had come from the right side of the trail, maybe 30 feet into the woods. We aimed our flashlights in that direction, but the beams barely cut through the darkness. Then, something moved. Not a deer, not a raccoon, something tall. It was just beyond the reach of our lights. But I swear I saw a figure standing between the trees, not moving, just standing there, watching us. We didn't wait to find out what it was. We took off, practically jogging down the trail. My heart was pounding, my ears straining for any sound behind us. And then, the whistling started again. This time, it was closer. Neither of us spoke. We just ran. The only thing I could think about was reaching the car, locking the doors, and getting the hell out of there. As we neared the parking lot near the Coomer Ridge campground, I dared one last glance over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trail, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, too tall. Its arms seemed wrong, like they were too long for its body, and it was still just standing there, watching. I tore my gaze away and sprinted the last stretch to the car. We jumped in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there. Neither of us spoke until we were halfway home. Josh finally broke the silence. "Dude, that wasn't a person." I didn't respond. I didn't want to think about what we saw. We never went back to that trail. I don't even tell people where exactly it was. Because whatever was out there, it was waiting, and I have a feeling it's still there. A few years ago, I went on a solo hiking trip to clear my head. I had just gone through a rough breakup, and I needed a weekend away from everything. I found a remote trail near Rainier National Park in Washington. Specifically, a lesser-known route off the Carbon River Trail that supposedly led to an abandoned fire lookout with amazing views. The trail itself wasn't well-traveled, but that was fine by me. I packed light, just enough for an overnight stay, and started my hike early in the afternoon. The first few miles were peaceful. No other hikers, just the sound of the wind through the trees. But after about an hour, I started noticing something strange. There were old, wooden signs along the trail, but the writing on them was completely worn away. Some were barely standing, leaning at odd angles as if they hadn't been touched in decades. I assumed they had once marked different paths or campgrounds, maybe part of the Ipsut Creek cabin area, but without any text. They were just eerie reminders of how alone I was out there. As the sun started to dip below the tree line, I spotted something up ahead. At first, I thought it was the fire lookout. maybe part of the old Tolmy Peak lookout, but as I got closer, I realized it was a small wooden cabin. It looked old, really old. The wood was dark and weathered, the roof sagging slightly. There were no signs of life, no smoke from a chimney, no lights inside, just a single window, half covered by a torn curtain. I don't know why, but the sight of it made me uneasy. Something about the way it just appeared. Still, the sun was setting fast, and I didn't want to set up camp in the dark. I figured if it was abandoned, I could at least take shelter on the porch for the night. I stepped closer and called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No answer. I knocked on the door, and the sound echoed in a way that made it clear the place was empty. At least, that's what I thought. Then I heard a noise from inside. A slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I backed away immediately. My first thought was that an animal had gotten trapped in there, but something about the way the sound moved, deliberate, unhurried, made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned around and decided to keep hiking. Sleeping in my tent suddenly seemed like a much better idea than staying anywhere near that place. I hiked for another 30 minutes before finally setting up camp in a clearing. The whole time, I felt watched. The trees were too quiet, the wind too still. But eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why. The forest was silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just nothing. Then I heard it. That same slow, dragging sound. But this time, it was coming from just outside my tent. I froze, barely breathing. The sound moved, circling my tent, pausing every few seconds like it was listening. I reached for my flashlight and, in one quick motion, unzipped the tent and shined the beam outside. Nothing. Just trees and darkness. No footprints, no broken branches. But when I turned my light toward the trail, my stomach dropped. The cabin was there. Not back where I had found it, but right at the edge of the clearing, barely 20 feet away. The door was open. I didn't pack up my tent. I didn't even put my boots on. I just grabbed my backpack and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car, lungs burning, heart hammering in my chest. The next day, I looked up the history of the area. I couldn't find any mention of an old cabin near the Carbon River Trail. In fact, I couldn't even find records of a cabin existing there at all. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know this, whatever it was, it followed me. Hiking alone is something I used to enjoy. There's a certain kind of peace that comes with being out in nature, away from the noise of everyday life. But after what happened last summer near Shawnee National Forest in Illinois, I don't think I'll ever do it again. It was late July, and I had just moved to Carbondale for work. I didn't know many people yet, so on weekends, I'd drive out to different hiking trails and spend a few hours exploring. One of the first places I checked out was Garden of the Gods, a well-known spot with incredible rock formations and scenic overlooks. But after a few crowded visits, I wanted something quieter. That's how I found Rimrock Trail. It wasn't as popular, and the first couple of times I went, I never saw another person. The trail wound through thick woods, leading to a small overlook. It felt untouched, isolated, peaceful. That should have been my first warning sign. One Saturday, I decided to hike it again, but I got a later start than usual. By the time I parked at the trailhead, the sun was already starting to set. I told myself I'd be quick, just a short walk to the overlook, snap a few pictures, and head back. About a mile in, I started to get that weird feeling like I wasn't alone. I stopped and listened. Nothing, just the distant sound of leaves rustling in the breeze. I shook it off and kept walking. Then, a few minutes later, I saw something. Up ahead, just off the trail, there was a man standing between the trees. He was tall, wearing what looked like an old hoodie and jeans, but something about him wasn't right. He was completely still, too still, like he wasn't even breathing. I hesitated, debating whether to turn around, but then he did something that made my stomach drop. He grinned. Not in a friendly way. It was too wide, too unnatural, like he was enjoying the fact that I saw him. I muttered a nervous "hey" and picked up my pace, keeping my eyes on the trail. My car wasn't too far back. If I hurried, I could get out of there in a few minutes. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, trying to act like I wasn't completely terrified. The footsteps stayed a few paces behind me, never getting closer, never falling behind. Then, out of nowhere, they stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was gone. The trail was empty, just trees and shadows. I should have felt relieved, but somehow, that made it worse. I practically ran the rest of the way back. When I reached my car, I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. Just as I put it in reverse, I looked up, and my blood turned to ice. There, standing at the tree line, was the man, still grinning. I don't remember much after that. I just remember flooring it out of there, not looking back until I was miles away. I never went back to Rimrock Trail. I don't even like driving near that area anymore. Because that night, I learned something. There are things in the woods that don't want to be found. And sometimes, they let you know